The mahogany conference table gleamed under the crystal chandelier as I watched Marcus Thompson's face drain of all color. His perfectly manicured hands trembled as he reached for his water glass, nearly knocking it over in the process. Beside him, Victoria Harrison, the woman he'd left me for 3 years ago, sat frozen in her designer chair, her blue eyes darting between Marcus and me like she was watching a tennis match where the ball might explode. Elena? Marcus's voice cracked on my name. What? How are you? What are you doing here? I smiled, the kind of smile that never quite reached my eyes, and adjusted the Cartier watch on my wrist, the same wrist that once wore a cheap plastic timepiece from Target. I'm conducting a business meeting, Marcus. Surely you remember those. You used to attend quite a few of them when you worked for Harrison Holdings. The emphasis on used to wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Victoria's father, William Harrison, cleared his throat nervously and shuffled through the acquisition papers spread before him. His company's financial statements made for grim reading: debt ratios that would make a loan shark weep, cash flow projections that resembled a ski slope, and asset valuations that had been declining faster than his daughter's trust fund. Miss Chen, William began, his voice carrying the forced joviality of a man trying to pretend his house wasn't on fire. Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand, the proposed acquisition of Harrison Holdings by your company, Ashford Industries, I supplied helpfully. Named after the street where I grew up. You know, where the houses have aluminum siding and the American dream comes with a 30-year mortgage? Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was still beautiful, I'd give her that. The kind of effortless beauty that came from good genes, expensive skincare, and never having worried about where her next meal was coming from. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her cream-colored Chanel suit probably cost more than I used to make in 3 months. But there was something different about her now. The confidence that came from unlimited daddy's money had been replaced by the brittle anxiety of someone watching their safety net develop holes. Elena, Marcus tried again, his voice stronger now, but still carrying an undertone of barely controlled panic. I had no idea you were involved in this. He gestured vaguely at the corporate documents, at my tailored Armani suit, at the corner office overlooking downtown Seattle where we sat 30 floors above the city that had once seemed so big and intimidating to a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. Involved? I laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes made of ice. Marcus, I'm not involved. I am this. Ashford Industries isn't just my company, it's my kingdom. And today, I'm here to discuss adding Harrison Holdings to my empire. The word empire hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me, the Seattle skyline stretched out like a map of conquered territories. I owned pieces of most of those buildings now. Offices, retail spaces, residential complexes. The girl who used to count pennies for bus fare now collected rent checks that could fund small nations. But how? Victoria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. 3 years ago, you were nobody, I suggested, arching one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A struggling graphic designer living in a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and dreams too big for her bank account? Yes, I remember those days quite well. I stood and walked to the window, my Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor with the precision of a metronome. Below us, the city bustled with the energy of people chasing their own versions of success. Some of them would make it, most wouldn't. The difference, I'd learned, was often just a matter of how badly you wanted to prove the doubters wrong. You want to know how this happened? I turned back to face them, silhouetted against the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. It's actually quite a story. Would you like to hear it? None of them answered, but I continued anyway. It begins with betrayal. It begins with a woman who thought she knew what love was, only to discover that the man she'd planned to marry saw her as nothing more than a placeholder until something better came along. Marcus flinched as if I'd struck him. Good. I wanted him to remember exactly what he'd done, exactly how he'd done it, and exactly why he was now sitting in my conference room begging for financial mercy. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days ago, I continued, my voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting a well-memorized speech. I came home to my tiny apartment. You remember it, don't you, Marcus? The one with the water stain on the ceiling and the radiator that sounded like a dying walrus? I came home to find my fiancé packing his belongings into garbage bags because he couldn't afford proper luggage. Victoria's perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the flush creeping up her neck. She knew this story, of course, but hearing it from my perspective was clearly making her uncomfortable. I was carrying flowers, I said, my eyes locked on Marcus's face. Daisies from the corner market because I couldn't afford roses. I'd just secured my biggest freelance client, a local brewery that wanted me to design their new logo. I was so excited to tell you, Marcus. I thought it might mean we could finally afford to upgrade from a studio to a one-bedroom for when we got married. Marcus's jaw clenched. He remembered this day too, though I doubted his version of events included the devastation he'd left in his wake. But instead of celebrating with me, you told me you were leaving. Not just the apartment. You were leaving me for her. I nodded toward Victoria, who was now studying her manicured nails with intense concentration. You told me that Victoria's father had offered you a position in the family business. Not just any position. A fast track to partnership, a corner office, a salary that would quadruple your income overnight. William Harrison had the grace to look embarrassed. He'd orchestrated his daughter's relationship with Marcus like a business merger, and everyone in the room knew it. You told me, I continued, my voice never wavering, that I should be realistic about our future, that I was holding you back, that Victoria understood the world you wanted to be part of, and I never would. The silence in the room was deafening. Outside, a helicopter circled the building, probably carrying another CEO to another meeting where other people's financial futures would be decided by handshakes and signatures on documents that most of them would never fully understand. And you know what the worst part was? I asked, returning to my seat at the head of the conference table. The worst part was that I believed you. I believed that I wasn't good enough. I believed that my love, my loyalty, my dreams for our future together weren't worth as much as her trust fund. I opened the leather portfolio in front of me and pulled out a photograph. It was from our engagement party, a small gathering in my apartment with cheap wine and homemade appetizers. In the picture, Marcus and I were laughing at something his college roommate had said. We looked happy. We looked like people who believed in forever. I kept this picture, I said, sliding it across the table to Marcus. Not because I missed you, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be naive enough to trust someone completely. Marcus picked up the photograph with shaking hands, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret, though it was hard to tell if he was regretting leaving me or regretting that leaving me had led him here. For 3 months after you left, I continued, I barely functioned. I lost weight because I couldn't afford groceries and couldn't stomach the thought of food anyway. I lost clients because I couldn't concentrate long enough to complete their projects. I lost myself because the person I thought I was, the woman who was worthy of love and commitment, had apparently been a delusion. Victoria was crying now, quiet tears that she was trying to hide behind her cascade of blonde hair. I wondered if she was crying for me, for Marcus, or for the privileged life that was about to disappear. But then something interesting happened, I said, my tone shifting from melancholy to something sharper, more dangerous. I got a phone call that changed everything. I pressed a button on the conference table's communication system. Sarah, could you bring in the Chen family documents? My assistant, Sarah Kim, entered the room carrying a thick manila folder. Sarah was brilliant, Harvard MBA, fluent in 4 languages, and ruthless in negotiations. She was also loyal, which was more valuable than all her other qualifications combined. Thank you, Sarah, I said as she placed the folder in front of me. These documents, I explained to the room, contain the records of my grandmother's estate. My grandmother, whom you never met, Marcus, because you always said we didn't have time to visit my family. Marcus had the decency to look ashamed at that reminder. He'd always found excuses to avoid my grandmother's Sunday dinners, claiming he had work to do or friends to see. The truth was, he'd been embarrassed by her tiny apartment in Chinatown, by her accented English, by the way she wore the same 3 dresses in rotation, because she said fancy clothes were a waste of money. My grandmother died when I was 12, I continued, opening the folder. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that she'd been much more than the sweet old woman who made me soup when I was sick and taught me to play mahjong on rainy afternoons. I pulled out a series of property deeds, stock certificates, and investment statements. The numbers on them were staggering. Millions of dollars in real estate, carefully selected stock portfolios, and business investments that had appreciated exponentially over the decades. It turns out, I said, watching their faces as the implications sank in, that my grandmother was what you might call a stealth millionaire. She lived modestly, dressed simply, and never spoke about money because she believed that visible wealth made people targets. But behind the scenes, she was building an empire. William Harrison's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. These properties, some of these are in prime downtown locations. The appreciation alone would be worth $57 million, I finished, as of 3 years ago. As of today, thanks to some strategic improvements and market appreciation, it's worth considerably more. Marcus's face had gone completely white. Elena, you never mentioned that I was potentially wealthy? I cut him off. Of course I didn't mention it because I didn't know. My grandmother set up the inheritance to be released when I turned 28, and only if I demonstrated the ability to live independently and make my own way in the world. I pulled out another document, a letter written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. She left me this explanation. Would you like me to read it? Without waiting for an answer, I began. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then you have reached the age where wisdom should temper ambition, and experience should guide dreams. I have watched you grow into a woman of strength and character, but I wanted to ensure that you learned to stand on your own before you learned to fly with the wind of fortune at your back. Victoria was listening intently now, perhaps recognizing something in my grandmother's words that resonated with her own experience of inherited wealth. Money, I continued reading, is like water. It can nourish and sustain, or it can flood and destroy, depending on how it is channeled. I have spent my life learning to channel it wisely, and now I pass that responsibility to you. Use it not for comfort, but for construction. Build something that will outlast your own life, something that will create opportunities for others the way this inheritance creates opportunities for you. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the folder. 3 days after you left me, Marcus, I received the call from the estate lawyers. 3 days after you decided I wasn't worth your time or commitment, I discovered that I was worth more money than you could earn in 10 lifetimes working for Victoria's father. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Marcus had left a millionaire's granddaughter for an heiress whose family business was failing. He'd abandoned real wealth for the illusion of wealth, substance for surface. But here's the thing, I said, leaning forward across the table. The money was just the beginning. It was a tool, not a destination. And I decided to use that tool to build something extraordinary. I pressed another button on the communication system. Sarah, could you bring in the Ashford Industries timeline? Sarah returned with a series of presentation boards that she arranged around the room. They told the story of my company's meteoric rise, from a single-person consulting firm to a multinational corporation with holdings in real estate, technology, manufacturing, and finance. Year 1, I began, standing to point at the first board. I used my inheritance to purchase 3 failing businesses in the Seattle area. A small tech startup that was bleeding money but had brilliant patents, a manufacturing company that was drowning in debt but had excellent infrastructure, and a real estate development firm that had overextended itself but owned prime property. The boards showed before and after photographs of these acquisitions. Rundown buildings transformed into gleaming offices, struggling employees promoted to management positions, failing companies turned into profitable enterprises. I didn't just buy these companies, I explained. I learned them. I spent 18-hour days understanding every aspect of their operations. I took night classes in business management, corporate finance, and strategic planning. I hired the best consultants I could afford and made them teach me everything they knew. Marcus was staring at the boards like they contained hieroglyphics he couldn't decode. This wasn't the Elena he remembered, the girl who struggled to balance her checkbook and got overwhelmed by complicated financial decisions. Year 2, I continued, moving to the next board. I began expanding. The tech startup developed 3 new products that revolutionized their industry. the manufacturing company secured contracts with major corporations across the Pacific Northwest. The real estate firm completed its first luxury development project and turned a 300% profit. Victoria was following my presentation with the attention of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. But how did you know which businesses to buy? How did you know they would succeed? I smiled at her question. I did my research. Exhaustive, obsessive, relentless research. I learned everything there was to know about market trends, consumer behavior, emerging technologies, and economic indicators. I studied every successful business acquisition of the past 50 years and identified the patterns that separated the successes from the failures. The truth was more complicated than that, of course. I'd also gotten lucky several times, made mistakes that could have been catastrophic, and benefited from the expertise of people much smarter than me. But luck favors the prepared, and preparation had become my religion. Year 3, I said, moving to the final board. I consolidated my holdings under the Ashford Industries umbrella and began looking for larger acquisitions. Companies with established market positions but poor management. Companies with valuable assets but unsustainable debt loads. Companies like Harrison Holdings. William Harrison's face had taken on the grayish pallor of a man watching his life's work reduced to bullet points on a presentation board. Miss Chen, surely we can discuss terms that would be mutually beneficial? Mr. Harrison, I interrupted gently. There are no mutually beneficial terms available. Your company is 3 months away from bankruptcy. Your largest clients have already begun transitioning to other service providers. Your investors have lost confidence in your leadership, and your debt-to-asset ratio makes you uninvestable by conventional standards. I returned to my seat and opened another folder. However, I am prepared to offer your family a graceful exit. Ashford Industries will assume all of Harrison Holdings' debts and liabilities, retain 90% of your current workforce, and provide generous severance packages for departing management. Marcus leaned forward. What about the current management team? What about you? I finished. That's an interesting question, Marcus. Tell me, what do you think your position should be in this acquisition? His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. I have extensive knowledge of the company's operations. I've been with Harrison Holdings for 3 years. I understand the client relationships, the internal processes. You understand how to manage a failing company, I corrected. You understand how to maintain the status quo while market share erodes and competitors gain ground. What you don't understand is how to innovate, how to lead, or how to build something sustainable. The words hit him like physical blows. I could see him shrinking in his chair, the confident facade he'd worn into the meeting crumbling like old paint. But I'm willing to be generous, I continued. There will be a severance package for all departing management. 6 months' salary, extended health benefits, and positive references for future employment opportunities. 6 months! Victoria's voice was sharp with disbelief. That's all? After everything Marcus has contributed to this company? I turned my attention to her, studying her face with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. Tell me, Victoria, what exactly has Marcus contributed? What innovations has he spearheaded? What new revenue streams has he developed? What strategic initiatives has he successfully implemented? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Everyone in the room knew the answer. Marcus had contributed nothing of value except his willingness to marry the boss's daughter. I thought so, I said softly. You see, Victoria, you and your family have been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about business. You believed that connections and family money were enough to guarantee success. You believed that Marcus's loyalty to your family was worth more than actual competence or vision. I stood and walked around the table until I was standing directly behind Marcus's chair. He stiffened but didn't turn around. But here's what you didn't understand, I continued, placing my hands on the back of his chair. Loyalty that can be bought isn't really loyalty at all. Marcus didn't leave me because he loved you, Victoria. He left me because he loved what you represented. Financial security, social status, an easier path to success. Victoria's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. That's not true. Marcus and I have a real relationship. We understand each other. Do you? I asked. Then tell me, Victoria, What was Marcus doing 3 nights ago when he told you he was working late at the office? The color drained from her face. He was he was preparing for this meeting. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photograph. It was Marcus, sitting at a bar downtown, deep in conversation with a brunette woman in an expensive dress. The timestamp showed it was taken at 11:30 p.m. on the night in question. Her name is Catherine Winters, I said conversationally. She's the daughter of Thomas Winters, who owns the largest investment firm in Portland. I believe Marcus has been cultivating her friendship in case your family's financial situation didn't improve. The sound Victoria made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Marcus spun around in his chair, his face a mask of panic and desperation. Elena, that's not what it looks like. Catherine is just a business contact. Really? I asked, pulling up another photo on my phone. Because this looks rather intimate for a business contact. The second photo showed Marcus and Catherine walking out of an upscale hotel together. They were holding hands. Victoria stood so abruptly that her chair toppled backward. "You bastard," she whispered, staring at Marcus with a mixture of betrayal and rage that I recognized all too well. "You absolute bastard." "Victoria, please," Marcus pleaded, reaching for her arm. "Let me explain." She jerked away from his touch like he was radioactive. "Explain? Explain what? That you're exactly the kind of man Elena said you were? That you've been hedging your bets in case my father's company failed?" The accuracy of her assessment seemed to surprise even her. She was learning, in real time, what it felt like to be discarded by someone she'd trusted completely. "The photographs were taken by a private investigator," I explained calmly. "I've been having Marcus followed for the past 6 months, ever since I learned about the Harrison Holdings acquisition opportunity. I wanted to understand exactly who I was dealing with." Marcus's face had gone from white to green. "You've been having me followed?" "Of course I have," I replied. "You didn't think I'd enter into a business relationship with my ex-fiancé without doing due diligence, did you? I know about your gambling debts, Marcus. I know about the money you've been skimming from company expense accounts. I know about the insider trading scheme you and Victoria's cousin cooked up last year." William Harrison stood up so fast he knocked his water glass onto the acquisition papers. "What insider trading scheme?" "Ask your nephew James," I suggested. "Or better yet, ask the SEC investigators who will be visiting your offices next week." The room erupted into chaos. Victoria was screaming at Marcus in language that would have made a sailor blush. William was frantically dialing his lawyer's number. Marcus was trying to explain and apologize simultaneously, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to salvage a situation that was already beyond salvation. I sat back in my chair and watched the implosion with the detached satisfaction of an architect admiring a perfectly executed controlled demolition. This was better than I'd hoped. I'd expected to destroy Marcus professionally, but he was destroying himself personally as well. "Enough!" I finally shouted, and the room fell silent. "We have business to conclude." I pressed the communication button again. "Sarah, please have security escort Mr. Thompson from the building. And call our legal department. I want him served with a restraining order before he reaches the parking garage." "Restraining order?" Marcus's voice cracked on the words. "You've been sending me emails and text messages for the past month," I said, pleading for a chance to explain yourself and asking for another opportunity. I consider that harassment, and my lawyers agree. 2 security guards entered the room, large, professional men who looked like they'd stepped out of a Secret Service recruitment poster. They flanked Marcus's chair and waited for my signal. "The choice is yours, Marcus," I said. "You can leave voluntarily or you can be escorted out. Either way, you're leaving." He looked around the room one last time, his eyes lingering on Victoria's tear-streaked face, then on the acquisition papers that represented his former employer's surrender, and finally on me. In his expression, I saw the exact moment when he fully understood what had happened to him. "Elena," he said quietly, "I know you hate me. I know I deserve this. But please, don't destroy me completely." I studied his face for a long moment, seeing traces of the man I'd once loved buried beneath the desperation and fear. For just an instant, I felt something that might have been pity. "Marcus," I said finally, "I'm not destroying you. You destroyed yourself. I'm just documenting the results. The security guard stepped forward, and Marcus allowed himself to be led from the room without further protest. The door closed behind them with the soft finality of a coffin lid being sealed. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "I can't believe he would, and I can't believe you would." "What?" I asked. "Take control of my own narrative? Refuse to let the people who betrayed me walk away without consequences? Use the advantages I've earned to level a playing field that was never fair to begin with?" She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You planned all of this, didn't you? The acquisition, the investigation, the photos. You planned to destroy us?" I considered her question carefully. "No, Victoria, I plan to succeed. Your destruction was just a pleasant side effect." William Harrison had finished his phone call and was staring at the acquisition papers with the expression of a man contemplating his own funeral arrangements. "Miss Chen, perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements, a partnership rather than an acquisition." "Mr. Harrison," I said gently, "your company is worth more to me as a tax write-off than as a going concern. The only value in Harrison Holdings is its client list and its real estate holdings. Everything else, the management structure, the corporate culture, the strategic vision, is worthless." The brutality of my assessment hung in the air like smoke from a crematorium. William Harrison's life's work reduced to a client list in some buildings. "However," I continued, "I meant what I said about generous severance packages. Your employees will be taken care of. Your clients will receive better service. And your family will have enough money to start over somewhere else." Victoria wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "What about Marcus? What's going to happen to him?" "That depends on the SEC investigation," I replied. "If he cooperates fully and provides evidence about the insider trading scheme, he might avoid prison. If he doesn't," I shrugged. "Well, federal sentences for financial crimes tend to be quite lengthy." The color drained from her face. "Prison?" "Victoria," I said, my voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Did you think you could build a relationship on the foundation of someone else's betrayal and face no repercussions?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to process the reality of her situation. 3 hours ago, she'd been an heiress engaged to a rising executive. Now she was the daughter of a bankrupt businessman, abandoned by a criminal who'd been using her as a stepping stone to someone wealthier. "You know what the ironic thing is?" I asked, returning to my seat. "If Marcus had stayed with me, if he'd been patient and loyal and committed to building something together, he would have been married to a wealthy woman anyway. He would have been the husband of a CEO instead of the discarded boyfriend of a disgraced heiress." The truth of that statement seemed to hit Victoria like a physical blow. She looked at the acquisition papers, at the photographs of Marcus with another woman, at the presentation boards showing my company's success, and I could see her understanding the full scope of what Marcus had thrown away. "He could have had everything," she whispered. "He could have had something real," I corrected. "Instead, he chose the illusion of something better, and now he has nothing at all." William Harrison signed the acquisition papers with the defeated resignation of a man who had run out of options. His signature was shaky but legally binding. Harrison Holdings would officially become a subsidiary of Ashford Industries at the close of business. "There's one more thing," I said as they prepared to leave. "Victoria, I have a proposition for you." She looked up at me with suspicious, red-rimmed eyes. "What kind of proposition?" "You're 26 years old," I said. "You've never held a real job or built anything with your own hands. Your entire identity has been based on your father's wealth and your family's social position. In a way, you're in the same position I was 3 years ago, facing the collapse of everything you thought you could depend on." She nodded slowly, not sure where I was going with this. "I'm offering you a choice," I continued. "You can take your severance money and disappear into comfortable obscurity somewhere far from Seattle. Live quietly, maybe marry a nice accountant, and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." I paused, letting the first option sink in before presenting the alternative. "Or," I said, "you can stay and work for me." The suggestion was so unexpected that she actually laughed, a short, bitter sound that contained no humor. Work for you? Doing what? Learning, I replied. Starting at the bottom of my organization and working your way up. Proving that you're more than just your father's daughter or your trust fund balance. Discovering what it feels like to earn something instead of inheriting it. Victoria stared at me like I'd suggested she volunteer for medical experiments. You want me to work for the woman who just destroyed my family's business? I want you to work for the woman who can teach you how to build your own business, I corrected. Your father's company was destroyed by poor management and market forces. I just happened to be the one with enough capital to take advantage of the opportunity. She was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the idea. What would I be doing? What kind of work? Whatever needs to be done, I said. Filing, data entry, coffee runs, research assistance. You'd start as my personal assistant and work your way up based on merit and performance. William Harrison was watching our conversation with the fascination of someone witnessing a car accident. Victoria, you don't have to— Yes, she does, I interrupted. She has to decide what kind of person she wants to be. The victim of circumstances beyond her control or the architect of her own future. Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city that would soon be her workplace rather than her playground. When she turned back to face me, her expression had changed. The entitled heiress was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the weight of real choices. What would my salary be? She asked. $40,000 a year to start, I replied. With performance bonuses and advancement opportunities based on your contribution to the company? Her jaw dropped. 40,000? I spend more than that on clothes. Then you'll need to learn to budget, I said simply. And you'll need to find a smaller apartment. And you'll need to discover what it's like to consider the price of something before you buy it. The reality of what I was offering and what it would require her to give up was finally sinking in. For someone who'd never worried about money, the prospect of living on a working-class salary was probably more terrifying than physical danger. Why? She asked finally. Why would you offer me this opportunity? I considered the question carefully. Because 3 years ago, someone showed me that I wasn't good enough for the life I thought I wanted. And instead of destroying me, that revelation forced me to become someone better than I ever imagined I could be. I stood and extended my hand to her. I'm offering you the same gift, Victoria. The chance to discover who you really are when everything you thought you could depend on is taken away. She stared at my outstretched hand for what felt like an eternity. Around us, the city hummed with the energy of people making choices that would define their futures. Some of them would succeed. Some would fail. But all of them would learn something about themselves in the process. Finally, Victoria reached out and shook my hand. Her grip was firmer than I'd expected. When do I start? She asked. Monday morning, I replied. 8 a.m. sharp, and Victoria, don't be late. I don't believe in second chances. As the Harrison family gathered their belongings and prepared to leave my conference room, I felt a strange sense of completion. Not satisfaction exactly, and certainly not happiness, but something more complex and enduring. 3 years ago, Marcus Thompson had taught me that the only person I could truly depend on was myself. He'd shown me that love without respect was worthless, that promises without commitment were meaningless, and that the only security in life was the security you created with your own hands. Today, I'd taught him the same lesson. The acquisition of Harrison Holdings was finalized within a week. The transition was remarkably smooth. Most of the employees were relieved to have job security again, and the clients were pleased to be working with a more stable organization. Several of Harrison Holdings' former competitors reached out to discuss potential partnerships, recognizing that Ashford Industries was now a major player in their industry. Marcus's legal troubles, however, were just beginning. The SEC investigation moved quickly once they had access to Harrison Holdings' financial records. The insider trading scheme was more extensive than even I had realized, involving several prominent families in Seattle's social scene. When the indictments were unsealed, the scandal dominated the local business news for weeks. Marcus himself was arrested at his apartment on a Tuesday morning. The local news stations ran footage of him being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face haggard from stress. He'd aged a decade in the 2 weeks since our confrontation, and the confident young executive who'd once believed he could climb the social ladder through strategic relationships was gone forever. During his trial, details of his relationship with Catherine Winters came to light. She testified that Marcus had promised to leave Victoria as soon as the Harrison family's financial situation stabilized, and that he'd been feeding her inside information about her father's investment firm in exchange for promises of future employment. The prosecution painted a picture of a man so desperate for wealth and status that he'd betrayed everyone who'd ever trusted him. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Victoria, meanwhile, surprised everyone, including herself, by thriving in her new role. She arrived at the office every morning at 7:45 a.m., stayed late without being asked, and approached even the most mundane tasks with the intensity of someone who had something to prove. Her wealthy friends initially mocked her for playing at being a working person, but as weeks turned into months and her commitment never wavered, the mockery turned to bewilderment, then grudging respect. She was good at the work, too. Her years of navigating Seattle's social scene had given her excellent people skills, and her intimate knowledge of the city's business community proved valuable in identifying potential acquisition targets. Within 6 months, I promoted her to junior analyst. Within a year, she was leading her own projects. "You know," she said to me one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly reports in my office, "I used to think you were cruel for offering me this job." "And now?" I asked. "Now I think it was the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me," she replied. "My entire life, people just gave me things. Money, opportunities, relationships. I never had to earn anything, so I never learned what I was actually capable of." She was different now, leaner, sharper, more focused. The soft edges that had come from a lifetime of privilege had been honed into something more durable. She still wore expensive clothes, but now she bought them with money she'd earned herself, which somehow made them more beautiful.